Tonight we travel to a time when gods still roamed the earth, often shirtless, occasionally invisible. This is the story of a mortal girl who fell in love with a divine mystery man. He was kind, he was gentle, he was absolutely ripped, and he had just one simple rule: don't look at me. Ever. What could possibly go wrong? This is the tale of trust issues, cosmic red flags, and why you probably shouldn't fall in love with an invisible god. Before we begin, please comment where you are and what time it is so we can see who's joining us from around the world. We love to see where you are tuning in from. Now close your eyes, sink into the covers, take a deep breath and release it, relaxing your face, shoulders and the rest of your body. Let your thoughts slow, and let this cheeky tale carry you gently into slumber. So picture this. Psyche was the kind of beautiful that made sculptors weep into their marble, and painters throw their brushes into the sea in despair. We're talking Helen of Troy levels of maybe we should tone this down a bit. People weren't just calling her pretty, they were building altars, writing poetry, and generally losing their minds. Venus, goddess of beauty, and not so coincidentally the queen of divine pettiness, was not amused. The temples of Venus were collecting cobwebs, while mortals were out here worshipping some random human girl who probably didn't even have a decent skincare routine. So Venus did what any reasonable goddess would do. She called her son Cupid and told him to make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous creature on earth. You know, normal mum stuff. But here's where it gets interesting. Cupid, floating invisible above Psyche's bedroom like the world's most divine creeper, took one look at her and promptly stabbed himself with his own arrow. Classic rookie mistake. The kind of mistake that makes you wonder if maybe immortal weapons of love should come with safety training. Meanwhile, Psyche's life wasn't exactly a dream. Sure, she was beautiful enough to make roses hang their heads in shame. But while her sisters were getting married off to kings and merchants, she sat alone in her room, surrounded by wilting flower crowns from her admirers. The air was thick with the sickly sweet perfume of dying petals and the bitter taste of loneliness. Her father, concerned that he might have angered the gods, spoiler alert he had, consulted an oracle. The oracle, who had clearly attended the cryptic prophecy school of dramatic declarations, announced that Psyche must be dressed in funeral clothes, left on a mountain, and married to a monster that even the gods feared. The wedding preparations were exactly as cheerful as you'd expect for a ceremony where the bride was basically being offered as divine takeout. The funeral dirge mixed with wedding songs, creating the world's most confusing playlist. Torches sputtered in the wind, casting shadows that looked suspiciously like someone was already regretting this entire situation. But when Psyche was left on that mountain, shivering in her funeral wedding dress, which, by the way, is not a fashion trend we should bring back, something unexpected happened. Instead of being eaten by a monster, she was picked up by the west wind, who apparently moonlighted as a divine Uber service. The wind carried her to a palace that made every royal residence look like a garden shed. We're talking golden columns that caught the sunlight like liquid fire, floors of precious gems that probably gave the cleaning staff nightmares, and fountains that somehow knew exactly what temperature you wanted your water to be. The air was filled with the scent of ambrosia and fresh-baked bread, because even divine palaces know the importance of good real estate staging, and that's where she met him. Well, sort of. She couldn't actually see him, but his voice was like honey drizzled over thunder, if that makes any sense. He told her he was her husband, that she could have anything she wanted in this palace, that she would want for nothing, except, you know, the basic human desire to know what your spouse actually looks like. Just one tiny rule, he said, his invisible presence somehow managing to convey both authority and nervousness. Don't try to look at me, ever, not even a peek. No nightlights, no surprise selfies, no elaborate systems of mirrors. Trust me on this. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a major red flag, congratulations. You're smarter than our protagonist. But in Psyche's defence, the invisible guy did give her a palace, and sometimes love is blind, even if in this case it was more of a court-mandated blindness. But oh my friends, this is just the beginning. because nothing tests trust quite like a pair of jealous sisters, an oil lamp, and the kind of curiosity that makes cats look positively restrained. So there was Psyche, living her best invisible husband life. During the day, she wandered through gardens where the flowers turned to face her like starstruck fans. At night, she dined on food that tasted like sunset and stardust, if sunsets wore honey and stardust had a hint of cinnamon. The only catch was that her husband only visited in total darkness, which made dinner conversations slightly awkward and choosing outfits entirely pointless. But happiness has a way of getting gatecrashed by family, and Psyche's sisters were Olympic-level medallers. They stood at the base of the mountain, wailing like discount sirens about how much they missed their baby sister. Their cries echoed up the cliffs, managing to sound both concerned and passive-aggressive at the same time. Psyche's invisible husband, showing all the wisdom of someone who had clearly never dealt with in-laws, agreed to let them visit. But remember, he warned, his unseen presence radiating worry like an anxious space heater. Don't listen to their advice, and definitely don't tell them about the whole invisible thing. They wouldn't understand. The sisters arrived, their jaws dropping faster than their jewellery standards when they saw the palace. The air filled with the sharp scent of their expensive perfumes, mixing with pure, undiluted envy. They circled the golden halls like vultures at a feast, their silk dresses rustling with barely contained jealousy. "Oh, darling sister," they cooed, their voices dripping with more honey than a beehive in a heatwave. "Your husband must be absolutely magnificent. Tell us, what does he look like?" Psyche, who had apparently never heard of the concept of lying, stumbled through various descriptions. "He's, young and hunting. Yes, he's always hunting, in the mountains, very busy, much hunting." The sisters exchanged glances that could have cut diamond. "Hunting, you say? Always away? Never seen in daylight?" Their eyebrows rose so high they were practically in orbit. "Dear sister, haven't you heard the oracle's prophecy about marrying a terrible monster?" They leaned in close, their jewellery clinking like warning bells. "What if," they whispered, their words slithering into Psyche's ears like poisoned honey, "your husband is actually a horrible serpent? What if he's waiting to eat you? What if he's just fattening you up with all this luxury?" "But he's so kind," Psyche protested weakly, though you could practically see the doubt beginning to gnaw at her like a hungry mouse on a cheese wheel. "That's exactly what a snake would want you to think," they insisted, which, to be fair, is solid snake psychology. "You must find out the truth. Take an oil lamp and a sharp knife. Wait until he's asleep, then look at him. If he's a monster, cut off his head. If he's not, well, then you can apologise for the whole knife thing." They left Psyche alone with these thoughts, probably high-fiving each other all the way down the mountain, and there sat our heroine, torn between trust and curiosity, love and fear, loyalty and a burning desire to know if her husband had a human face, or if she'd been sharing her bed with something that belonged in a cryptozoology textbook. That night, the palace seemed quieter than usual. The marble floors whispered beneath her feet as she crept through the halls, armed with an oil lamp in one hand and a knife in the other, the ancient Greek equivalent of having trust issues. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of lamp oil, which, in retrospect, probably should have been a warning sign. Picture this: moonlight streaming through crystal windows, the soft sound of divine snoring. Yes, gods snore. They're just better at it than we are. And Psyche tiptoeing across the room like she's auditioning for world's most anxious cat burglar. Her hands trembled as she raised the oil lamp, its flame dancing like her rapidly deteriorating common sense. The light fell across the bed and, oh, there, lying on sheets woven from dreams and probably a ridiculous thread count, was not a monster. Not even close. This was Cupid himself, looking like he'd just stepped out of a divine beauty campaign. We're talking golden curls, wings that made swan feathers look like budget knockoffs, and the kind of face that launched 1,000 statues. Even asleep, he was radiating the sort of beauty that made you understand why people wrote poetry. Psyche stood there, lamp in hand, absolutely gobsmacked. This was the moment she should have quietly put the lamp down and pretended this never happened. But no, she had to lean in for a closer look, because apparently the universe's most gorgeous deity wasn't quite close enough. And then, because the gods have a sense of humour that belongs in a slapstick comedy, her hands shook. One tiny drop of hot oil fell from the lamp and landed right on Cupid's shoulder. Let me tell you, nothing ruins a moment of silent appreciation quite like accidentally deep-frying your divine husband. Cupid woke up with a yelp that was decidedly ungodlike. His eyes flew open, taking in the scene, the lamp, the knife, which Psyche was still holding like the world's most incompetent assassin, and the look of absolute horror on his wife's face. The air crackled with divine disappointment and the faint smell of singed deity. "I asked you to do one thing," Cupid said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who just caught their spouse breaking the single rule in their relationship contract. "One tiny thing. Don't look at me. That's it. Not defeat the Hydra or clean the Augean stables. Just don't look." The palace around them began to fade like morning mist, which is never a good sign in mythology. The golden columns dissolved, the magical fountains dried up, and the self-preparing feast tables vanished mid-appetizer. "But I love you!" Psyche cried, which might have been more convincing if she wasn't still holding the knife. "Love is built on trust," Cupid replied, doing that dramatic wing-spreading thing that divine beings are so fond of. "And trust, unlike my shoulder, isn't something you can just splash some nectar on and hope it gets better." And with that he flew away, leaving Psyche standing alone in what was now just a regular old mountaintop. The only evidence of the magical palace was a lingering scent of ambrosia and her sister's footprints in the dust, which somehow managed to look smug. But this isn't where our story ends, because Psyche, having lost everything except her determination and slightly oil-stained dress, decided to do what any sensible person would do after alienating their divine husband. She was going to march straight to Venus, her mother-in-law from Hades, and ask for help. Now, if you're thinking this plan sounds about as wise as using a Hydra as a hairdresser, you're not wrong. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and Psyche was about to learn exactly how desperate things could get. Now walking into Venus's temple was about as smart as using Zeus's lightning bolts as party sparklers. The goddess of beauty was still fuming about the whole mortal girl stealing her thunder situation, and finding out this same girl had married her son and then promptly fumbled the relationship was not improving her mood. Venus's laughter echoed through the temple like breaking crystal dipped in poison. "So," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails, "you want my help in finding my son, the son you betrayed?" The air around her shimmered with rage and designer perfume. "I'll do anything," Psyche said, which is exactly the kind of blank check promise that gets mortals into trouble in these stories. Venus's smile could have curdled nectar. "Anything? Perfect. I have a few small tasks. Complete them, and maybe, just maybe, I'll consider helping you." Her voice carried all the warmth of a polar bear's swimming pool. The first task seemed simple enough. Sort a massive pile of mixed seeds before sunset. We're talking about every grain and seed known to mankind, all jumbled together like nature's most annoying puzzle. The pile was larger than Psyche's house, and each seed was smaller than her smallest hope of completing this task. But just as Psyche was about to have a very understandable breakdown, an army of ants showed up. Not just any ants. These were the kind of organised ants that make military generals look sloppy. They sorted those seeds faster than a group of gossips sorting through fresh rumours. Each grain and seed found its proper pile, guided by tiny ant foremen who probably had tiny clipboards. Venus was not amused. Her next task involved collecting golden wool from flesh-eating sheep that made regular rams look like cuddle buddies. These sheep had the kind of attitude you'd expect from something that considered demigods a light snack. But a helpful read, yes, a talking read, this is Mythology, keep up, whispered to Psyche about waiting until noon when the sheep napped. She collected the wool that had snagged on brambles while the murderous sheep were busy counting their deadly sheep friends. The third task was the kind of errand that made the previous ones look like a trip to the market. Venus handed Psyche a crystal flask and said, "Fill this with water from the source of the river Styx. You know, that river in the underworld, the one surrounded by knife-sharp rocks guarded by dragons, and oh yes, it's water that can literally dissolve your soul." The air temperature dropped several degrees just from mentioning it. Even the temple pigeons looked concerned. But Psyche, who by this point had developed the kind of determination that makes mules look indecisive, set off toward the world's deadliest water source. This time it was an eagle, Jupiter's own Uber Eats delivery bird, that came to her rescue, snatching the flask and filling it while avoiding both dragons and soul dissolution. Venus looked at the completed tasks like they were badly done homework. "Fine," she said, in a tone that suggested nothing was fine. "One last task. A tiny little errand, really. Just pop down to the underworld and ask Persephone for a bit of her beauty in this box. Don't open it, though. It's, very sensitive to light." Now, anyone who's ever heard a fairy tale knows that when someone tells you not to open a mysterious box, that box contains certain doom. But Psyche, who had apparently learned nothing from the whole lamp incident, took the box and headed for the underworld. Getting to the underworld was like trying to get into the most exclusive club in existence, except instead of a bouncer, you had to deal with Charon, the world's grumpiest ferryman. The river Styx stretched before her, dark as broken promises and twice as cold. The air smelled like regret and whatever that weird smell is in really old basements. Psyche had come prepared, though. She brought 2 coins for Charon, one for each way because nobody wants to be stuck in the underworld like it's some divine lost and found, and some honey cakes for Cerberus. Turns out even 3-headed hellhounds are suckers for baked goods. The underworld itself was exactly as cheerful as you'd expect from a place decorated entirely in shades of gloom and doom. Psyche made her way past fields of ghostly asphodels, the most depressing flowers in existence, and crowds of spirits who really needed to work on their personal space boundaries. Persephone, looking fabulous in her Queen of the Dead ensemble, was surprisingly chill about the whole beauty in a box request. Maybe she was just happy to have a visitor who wasn't trying to rescue their dead lover or challenge her husband to a lyre battle. So there was Psyche, heading back to the surface, carrying a box that practically hummed with forbidden mystery. The box whispered to her. Not literally, that would be weird, but in that way that all prohibited things whisper to us. "Open me," it seemed to say. "What's the worst that could happen? Besides, don't you want to look your best for your reunion with Cupid?" And of course she opened it. Plot twist. It wasn't beauty in the box. It was magical sleep, the kind that makes regular naps look like power blinks. Psyche collapsed faster than Zeus's marriage vows, the box clattering beside her like a cosmic joke's punchline. But here's where the story takes a turn, because Cupid, who had been watching this whole time like a divine stalker with wings, finally decided enough was enough. His shoulder had healed, his pride had recovered, and watching his wife complete impossible tasks while his mother played world's worst mother-in-law had given him a new perspective. He swooped down, wiped the magical sleep from Psyche's face. Yes, apparently you can just wipe off magical sleep, who knew? And then did something unprecedented in the history of divine mortal relationships. He went to Zeus and actually asked for permission to marry her properly. Zeus, who was probably just happy to be involved in a love story that didn't involve him turning into a swan or a shower of gold, made Psyche immortal. Even Venus had to admit defeat, though she did it with the kind of smile that suggested she was already planning the most passive-aggressive family dinners in mythology. And so, Psyche became a goddess. Cupid got his wife back and they lived happily ever after, or as happily as you can when your mother-in-law is Venus and your marriage started with attempted monster slaying. The moral of the story. Trust is important. Curiosity can be dangerous. And if your invisible husband tells you not to look at him, he's probably a god with really controlling parents. Also, maybe don't take relationship advice from jealous sisters, but that's just common sense. The end. Though some say that to this day Venus still rolls her eyes every time someone calls Psyche and Cupid relationship goals. Oh wait, you might be wondering why Cupid, literal god of looking so good it hurts, was playing hide and seek in his own marriage in the first place. Well, there's actually a reason, and it's peak divine logic. See, Cupid had a bit of a reputation problem. Everyone knew him as that chubby baby flying around shooting arrows at unsuspecting people's hearts. Seriously, all the artwork made him look like he'd just graduated from divine daycare. Try being taken seriously as a god of love when everyone expects you to be wearing a magical diaper. But in reality, Cupid was a full-grown deity with the kind of looks that made Mount Olympus's most beautiful list. A very competitive category, mind you. He knew the moment Psyche saw him, she'd realise he was the Cupid, and then things would get complicated. Would she love him for him, or for his godly status? Would she treat him differently, knowing he was the same deity her sisters prayed to for good marriages? Plus, there was that whole "my mother wants you dead" situation. Nothing kills the mood quite like your wife finding out your mum literally sent you to curse her with horrible love luck, and you ended up falling for her instead. Talk about an awkward "how I met your mother" story. So he figured, why not keep things simple? Just be a mysterious, invisible husband with a really nice palace and impeccable personal hygiene. No baggage, no divine drama, no explaining why his baby pictures looks nothing like him. In retrospect, maybe he should have realised that "don't look at me ever" was the kind of rule that practically begged to be broken. But hey, even gods of love can be a bit dense about relationships sometimes. Next, let's dive into a story that proves even ancient deities should have read the terms and conditions before trying viral challenges. This is the tale of Orphne, a nymph who learned the hard way that pranking the king of gods is about as smart as using lightning bolts as hair curlers. Picture this. Mount Olympus, the original influencer headquarters. The gods are doing their usual thing. Zeus is transforming into random animals to flirt. Hera's planning elaborate revenge schemes. And Hermes is probably inventing a new form of cryptocurrency. Enter Orphne, a nymph with more confidence than common sense, and the kind of ambition that makes Icarus look cautious. She wasn't content with being just another pretty face in the divine crowd. No, she wanted to be trending on Mount Olympus's hottest gossip scrolls. Now most people would start small, maybe challenge Apollo to a karaoke contest, perhaps organise a divine bake-off. But Orphne, she decided to go straight for the top. She was going to prank Zeus himself, the OG power user, the guy whose mood swings cause thunderstorms. What could possibly go wrong? Her brilliant plan went something like this. Zeus had this habit of transforming into animals to romance mortals, and by romance, we mean behaviour that would get you instantly blocked on every dating app in existence. Everyone knew about the swan thing and even the bull episode. Orphne figured she'd beat him at his own game. She'd learned this fancy new transformation spell from a discount scroll she'd bought from a travelling merchant. Side note, always read the reviews, before purchasing divine magic from street vendors. The plan was to turn herself into the most magnificent fish ever seen, jump out of the water when Zeus was having his morning ambrosia by the sea, and then transform back while saying something witty like, "Caught you looking." The other nymphs tried to talk her out of it. Remember what happened to Arachne, they said? She challenged a god, and now she's literally hanging by a thread. But Orphne just flipped her hair and said something about how many followers she'd get on Mount Olympus's social media equivalent, which was basically just Hermes spreading gossip but with better graphics. The big day arrived. Zeus was doing his usual morning routine, sitting by the sea, sipping ambrosia, probably swiping right on his divine dating app. Orphne hid behind a rock, clutching her discount transformation scroll and practicing her victory speech. Now, here's where we should mention that ancient Greek spells were basically like those terms and conditions nobody reads, full of fine print, weird clauses, and the occasional curse just to keep things interesting. Orphne started chanting the spell, which sounded like someone trying to speak backwards while gargling seawater. The magic began to work. She could feel herself changing. Scales appeared on her skin, shimmering with all the colours of a sunset reflected in a disco ball. Her hair turned into fins that would make mermaids file harassment complaints with Poseidon. She was becoming the most fabulous fish in the Mediterranean. But then she hit the spell's fine print. See, what the discount scroll failed to mention, probably in text smaller than Athena's patience with foolish mortals, was that this particular transformation spell had a tiny catch. It was permanent. As in, forever ever. As in, hope you like sushi because that's your life now, permanent. The realisation hit her about the same time she realised she couldn't remember how to walk, or breathe air, or most importantly transform back. Zeus, still sitting on his beach throne, nearly choked on his ambrosia as he watched a very confused, very sparkly fish flop around on the shore, making what appeared to be attempts at sarcastic comments, but coming out as blub blub blub. The king of gods, who had seen his fair share of transformation mishaps, mostly his own, couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Here was someone trying to mock his animal transformation habits, only to end up permanently transformed herself. It was the kind of cosmic karma that made even the fates slow clap. Now you might be thinking this is where Zeus, in his infinite wisdom and mercy, would step in and reverse the spell. But Zeus had a very particular sense of humour, the kind that appreciated a good prank, almost as much as he enjoyed turning into poultry to pick up dates. Instead of helping, he did what any responsible deity would do. He called everyone on Olympus to come watch. Soon the beach was crowded with gods and goddesses, all trying not to laugh, some more successfully than others, at the sight of Orphne, now officially the most fabulous fish in existence, attempting to give them what she probably thought was a fierce glare, but really just looked like regular fish face. Poseidon, trying to be helpful in his own way, offered her a prime spot in his underwater kingdom. "You'll be the talk of the reef," he said, barely containing his grin. "The other fish will absolutely school you." Apollo started composing a song about it on the spot, something with way too many fish puns and a chorus that went, "She wanted to be famous now. She's swimming with the fishes. Careful what you wishes." Nobody ever said the god of poetry was good at rhyming under pressure. Hermes, ever the entrepreneur, immediately started taking orders for I Witnessed the Fish fiasco merchandise. The shirts were a hit, especially the ones that said, "Something's fishy on Olympus," with a little cartoon of a bedazzled fish trying to look sarcastic. Even the other nymphs who had warned her about this very kind of situation couldn't help but snap the ancient Greek equivalent of selfies with their newly aquatic friend. "This is totally going in the Oracle newsletter," one of them whispered, which was basically the ancient version of going viral. And Orphne, well, she did achieve her goal of becoming famous, just not quite in the way she'd planned. She became known as the flashiest fish in the Mediterranean, the cautionary tale of what happens when you try to out-transform a transformation expert, and the reason why pulling an Orphne became divine slang for any plan that backfired spectacularly. Some sailors claim that on quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear a faint blub 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 that sounds suspiciously like someone trying to say, "But did you see how many followers I got, though?" The moral of the story: always read the fine print on your transformation spells, and maybe don't try to prank the god who literally invented dramatic transformations. Also, if you're buying divine magic from a street vendor, at least check their Yelp reviews first. The end. Though some say that Orphne eventually made the best of her situation and became a successful influencer in Poseidon's kingdom, specialising in underwater fashion tips and fin care routines. Her TikTok equivalent, Scales and Tails, was particularly popular among the younger merfolk. And Zeus? Well, he learned absolutely nothing from this incident and continued his animal transformation shenanigans. But he did occasionally visit the beach to wave at the sparkly fish who tried to prank him, usually while enjoying a nice plate of, well, definitely not seafood. Even gods know better than to eat their entertainment. As for the discount spell merchant, legend has it they made a fortune selling As Seen on Olympus transformation scrolls, each with a warning label that read, "Results may vary. Side effects may include permanent fishification, no refunds. And that's why, to this day, whenever someone comes up with a plan that sounds too clever by half, the old-timers just shake their heads and say, "Don't go fishing for trouble, you might just catch it permanently." Next, we're diving into a story that proves being stuck on repeat isn't just a problem for modern playlists. This is the tale of Echo, a nymph who was the original "and then what happened" girl who got the divine equivalent of a mute button. Picture this: Mount Olympus, back when it was basically Love Island meets Real Housewives, but with more thunderbolts and questionable transformation choices. Echo was living her best life as the most talkative nymph in the entire divine zip code. We're talking someone who could outchat Hermes, and he literally talks for a living. Echo wasn't just chatty. She was the original influencer, the queen of tea, the nymph who knew everyone's business and treated discretion like Zeus treated marriage vows, which is to say, not at all. She had the kind of personality that made coffee nervous and Red Bull question its life choices. But her real talent? Distraction. This nymph could spin a story so engaging, so full of, and then what happened? Moments that you'd forget what you were doing, where you were going, and possibly your own name. It was like having TikTok in verbal form, but with more drama and significantly more divine scandals. And that's exactly what got her into trouble. See, Zeus, the guy whose romantic decision-making skills were questionable at best, was up to his usual hobby of definitely not cheating on Hera. But this time, he had Echo on his team as the ultimate wingwoman. Whenever Hera would start getting suspicious and head down to Earth for a surprise inspection, Echo would intercept her like the world's most talkative security system. She'd start chattering about the latest Olympian drama. Oh my gods. Did you hear about what Apollo said to Artemis about her new hunting outfit? And then Athena was like, and then Aphrodite said, and you won't believe what happened next. By the time Echo was done with her updates, Zeus would be back on Olympus, probably wearing a world's best husband toga, and pretending he'd been there all along, doing totally innocent and not at all suspicious things. This worked great until it didn't. Because here's the thing about Hera, she might not have been the goddess of wisdom, Athena had that copyright locked down, but she wasn't born yesterday. After the 47th time Echo just happened to run into her with the most amazing story you've got to hear, Hera started to notice a pattern. It was like when you realise your cat isn't actually bad at telling time. They're just trying to convince you that dinner is supposed to be at 3 p.m, 4 p.m, and 5 p.m. The final straw came during what would later be known as the Tuesday incident. Zeus was off doing his thing, this time as a particularly charming golden retriever. He was really scraping the bottom of the transformation barrel at this point, and Echo was on distraction duty. But this time, instead of her usual celebrity gossip approach, Echo made the rookie mistake of trying to defend Zeus. But have you considered that maybe he's just really passionate about zoology? I mean, turning into animals could be for research purposes, for science. Even the nearby trees face-palmed at that one. Hera's reaction was about what you'd expect from someone who just caught their divine HR manager helping their husband run the ancient Greek equivalent of a dating app. She was, to put it mildly, not amused. Now Hera could have gone with her usual punishment playbook, transformation into something small and squishable, exile to some uncomfortably warm place, or the classic eternal torment package. But no. Hera decided to get creative. She looked at Echo, who was still trying to explain how Zeus's recent swan transformation was probably just birdwatching gone wrong, and thought, you know what would be really ironic? And that's how Echo, the nymph who never met a conversation she couldn't extend into a 3-hour marathon, got hit with the divine equivalent of a cosmic mute button. Hera cursed her to only be able to repeat the last few words that others said. Want to hear how that worked out for her? I thought so. So there's Echo, newly cursed, trying to figure out how to make repeat the last words someone says work as a personality trait. It's like being stuck with a cosmic copy-paste function, but only for audio. She spent her days wandering through the forests, probably practicing her new skill on unsuspecting wildlife. Owl. Who? Echo. Who? and that's pretty much how it went. But then one day, she spotted him, Narcissus, the guy who made self-care look like self-obsession and probably invented the selfie. He was walking through the woods, presumably looking for his next reflection fix, when Echo saw him and had what we'll generously call a moment. Now imagine trying to flirt with someone when you can only repeat their last words. It's like trying to use Google Translate for dating, but worse. Narcissus. Is anyone here? Echo. Here. Narcissus. Come to me. Echo. Come to me. Narcissus. Let us meet here. Echo. Let us meet here. It was basically the ancient Greek version of a bad Tinder conversation. Finally, Echo decided to do what any reasonable person would do when faced with communication barriers. She jumped out from behind a tree to give Narcissus a hug. Because nothing says, I'm totally normal and not at all cursed, like ambush hugging strangers in the forest. Narcissus, who was about as interested in other people as a cat is in tax regulations, reacted poorly. And by poorly, I mean he literally ran away screaming something about how no one could love him as much as he loved himself. Echo, standing there with her arms still in hugging position. Himself. But wait, it gets better, because Narcissus then found a pool of water and fell in love with his own reflection. This guy literally found his perfect match in a puddle. Talk about having high standards. They were so high he could only date himself. Meanwhile, Echo was stuck watching this one-man production of love at first sight in a mirror, only able to repeat his increasingly dramatic monologues. Narcissus. Oh, how beautiful you are. Echo. Beautiful you are. Narcissus. I love you so much. Echo. Love you so much. Narcissus. Why can't I reach you? Echo. Can't reach you. It was like watching someone fall in love with their Instagram filters, but in real time. The worst part? She couldn't even tell him he was making googly eyes at himself. She had to watch as this human personification of a selfie stick slowly wasted away by the pool, too busy admiring his reflection to eat, drink, or update his status. Eventually, Narcissus turned into a flower, because apparently that's just what happened to people in ancient Greece. You either became a plant or a constellation, there was no in-between. And Echo? Well, she faded away until only her voice remained, doomed to forever repeat the last words of others. Some say you can still hear her in caves and valleys today, though most people assume it's just an acoustic phenomenon. But occasionally, if you listen carefully, you might hear a faint voice repeating things like, "Did you get that on camera? Is this lighting good for my TikTok? Wait, let me take another selfie." Because even after thousands of years, Echo's still stuck dealing with Narcissus types. Only now they have smartphones. They say the moral of this story is something about self-love and communication, but really it's probably don't help Zeus cheat on his wife, and maybe swipe left on guys who bring their own mirrors to first dates. And that's why, to this day, when someone's being particularly self-absorbed, we call them narcissistic, and when we hear our words bounce back at us, we call it an echo. Because nothing says lasting legacy quite like becoming terminology for annoying behaviours. The end. Next, let me tell you about the time Hephaestus, god of craftsmanship and definitely not winning any divine beauty contests, orchestrated the ancient Greek equivalent of a reality TV season finale. Picture this. Hephaestus, who's out here basically being the Tony Stark of Olympus, minus the charm plus a limp, is married to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and making questionable relationship choices. Now this marriage was arranged by Zeus, who apparently thought, let's pair the goddess of beauty with the god of dad jokes and workshop accidents, was solid matchmaking. Aphrodite, meanwhile, had been spending an awful lot of training sessions with Ares, god of war and looking good in leather. Their excuse? Combat choreography practice. Right. Because the goddess of beauty definitely needs tips on how to swing a sword from the god who once tried to solve a math problem by stabbing it. But Hephaestus wasn't born yesterday. He was actually thrown off Olympus as a baby, but that's another therapy session entirely. He started noticing some suspicious signs. Ares' chariot parked in the visitors parking only cloud section way too often. Mysterious love notes written in surprisingly aggressive handwriting. His anvil kept getting rearranged into a heart shape. Aphrodite suddenly developing an interest in war strategy meetings, despite previously thinking Mars was just a really red star. So what does our crafty craftsman do? Well, there's Hephaestus sitting in his workshop, probably stress-forging lightning bolts for Zeus's latest temper tantrum, when he decides, you know what, I'm about to make TMZ look like amateur hour. First he announces he's going on a business trip to Lemnos. Apparently some mortals needed help with their volcanic furnace situation, a likely story. But before leaving, he puts his DIY skills to work, creating what can only be described as the world's first home security system meets viral content creator. This man, this genius, crafts a network of incredibly fine, absolutely unbreakable golden chains. We're talking chains so thin they're practically invisible, but stronger than Zeus's commitment issues. He strategically places them all around his and Aphrodite's bed, creating what was essentially ancient Greece's first trap house. But wait, it gets better. These weren't just any chains. They were equipped with the ancient equivalent of smart home technology. The moment anyone got into that bed, snap! The chains would instantly wrap around them, holding them in place, while simultaneously sending a notification to Hephaestus' smartwatch, which was really just a very tiny sundial he'd cleverly engineered. So Hephaestus leaves for his business trip, and by leaves, I mean he literally just went around the corner and waited, probably stress-eating ambrosia and muttering, we'll see who's too focused on their forge now. Meanwhile, Ares, who had all the subtlety of a minotaur in a pottery shop, sees his chance. He shows up at Aphrodite's door with what I can only assume was the ancient Greek equivalent of Netflix and chill. Hey, I brought some nectar and a new scroll about war strategies, but actually it's just a collection of love poems written in aggressive capital letters. Aphrodite, who apparently thought her husband was as blind as he was lame, invites him in, and that's when everything goes exactly according to Hephaestus' plan. The moment they hit the bed, snap! The chains spring into action faster than Zeus spotting an unattended mortal wedding. Ares and Aphrodite find themselves caught quite literally in the act, trapped in what would become history's most embarrassing tableau. But Hephaestus? Oh no, he wasn't done. This man didn't just want revenge, he wanted witnesses. He immediately sends out the ancient Greek version of a group text to all the other gods, like literally all of them. And the gods? They showed up like it was the premiere of Real Housewives of Mount Olympus. All the male gods came running, the goddesses, having significantly more dignity, sent their regrets, but definitely got the highlight reel later from Hermes. Picture this scene. Ares and Aphrodite trapped in their compromising position, while a crowd of immortal beings stand around trying really hard not to make eye contact with anyone. The best part? When someone finally asked Hephaestus what it would take to release them, he demanded back every single wedding gift he'd given for Aphrodite's hand in marriage. This man turned divine justice into a refund policy. But the real cherry on top, after all this drama, after the most elaborate gotcha moment in divine history, after embarrassing the god of war and the goddess of beauty in front of the entire pantheon, Ares and Aphrodite still didn't learn their lesson. They just got better at checking for traps. And that, my friends, is why you don't mess with the god who has access to both unlimited crafting materials and too much time on his hands. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't served hot or cold, it's served with an audience and impeccable engineering. The end.